Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 39 of Truth or Trend, the holistic breakdown with Dr. Vrzal and myself. Today, we've got some interesting things that we're going to share with you. A few weeks ago, I was teaching a webinar about the top drugs being sold in the country, and we thought this might be an interesting thing to share with everybody. Not in a way to say that we're going after these drugs, but we can learn from if there's so many people on these medications, what is that saying about us, and what can that inform us about what we can do preventively to strengthen our bodies? When I'm always talking about longevity, I focus on heart for a month, I focus on the brain for a month, but the third month, I always focus on immune function. And I think that's going to pay a lot of, or it really bring us a greater understanding of why I'm focusing on that today. And then the special treat, Dr. V is going to take us through some of his slides from the seminar he taught in Houston a little while back. But first, let's take a look at this top 25 drugs. Now, Dr. V and I were looking at this, and we wanted to point out that this is Q1. In the beginning of this year, $7,000 million of Keytruda were sold. And in the second quarter, 8,000 million. So by my math, we're looking at $15 billion in the first half of this year to this drug, which means that there are tons of people out there who are using this for a reason. What's the reason that they're doing that? And so when we look at Keytruda, it treats 18 types of cancer, including certain early stage and advanced cancers. Now that's interesting, right? We're always very concerned about heart health being the number one killer, but of course, cancer is right behind it. We need to employ effective strategies to do everything we can to keep us from being the people who are in need of these medications. So what Dr. V and I like to do is we look at the mechanism, right? Not only of the drugs, but also of whatever's going on. And there's three mechanisms here, and they all have to do with immune function. Number three here, enhanced immune response, inhibiting immune suppression. And so all this has to do with these T cells, and that's what we're going to get into in a little bit in understanding those T cells. There's a lot of great information online about Keytruda and talking about how it's, melanoma, non-small cell lung cancers, renal cell carcinoma, triple negative breast cancers, right? All of these are approved for this. But here's the part that we get worried about, right? The severe and fatal immune-related adverse reactions. So our question obviously is, what has been missing from our lives? What can we do to support our immune function? Or what have we been missing, and why our immune function is so weak that we can get ahead of this? One of the things that I was sharing with Dr. V earlier is this cell reports about just alanine alone being an amino acid that's not an essential amino acid, but it is an amino acid that is essential for this T cell activation. That's kind of what we're talking about a lot here. And Dr. V, you mentioned Thymus, right? So we wanted to also let people know we talk a lot about standard process, and there's very interesting research in 2009 on the publication of Conjuplex, which contains Thymus, which you mentioned, but also RNA, and actually found this research. And there's some interesting results in the fact that there are a lot of things that we can support to support the T cells. And you're going to get into this a little bit, but even one search on AI saying, hey, what do you need to activate T cells? It's a lot: amino acids, lipids, vitamin D, vitamin A, B6, C, and zinc, right? Crucial for supporting T cell function. I think you're going to get into that in the slides. All of this, I say, is there's so many opportunities for someone to be short in one of these or the other. If we were to be diligent and focused on making sure that we're getting adequate amounts of these on the regular basis, how much less would people need to have a medication that jumps in and does that? Dr. V, what do you have to say about all that? That's the longest intro I've ever given.
Was very, very valuable though. So, I mean, you had great information there. And ultimately, I mean, when somebody hears that they have cancer, it's like, what do you need? Here's the title of my house. They're all in. And so really what we're trying to do is help inspire people to recognize the early warning signs, to be ahead of the game, figure out, oh man, I have white clouds in my fingernails. That's an early sign of zinc deficiency. That means their immune system is going to be undernourished, undersupplied,
Right.
for these T cells and things that they need. I mean, there's all kinds of early warning signs that, unfortunately people tend to, plug their ears and cover their eyes and la la la, and then now John was fine until now all of a sudden he had cancer. He was an athlete, or these
Right.
things, but he wasn't fine. He was, ignoring. And I'm saying he because it's usually the men, right? That are, ignoring. I'm okay, and pound their chest and go back to it. So we want to learn from these early warning signs so that we can save, not that we want to try to cut out anybody's business, but would you
But
say 700 billion,
right.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, and to your point, just if it's just zinc alone, right? If you could just focus on making sure somebody has enough zinc, it's not just protective for their immune system, it's all the other things that are happening in the body that they're going to be a healthier, stronger version of themselves if they just
Right.
do that. This is why we test everybody's zinc with the zinc taste test when they come in, and we encourage them to do it every 90 days, just to bring your focus just back to that one.
Totally.
But
Right, right,
talk to us
right.
about T cells, Doc. Tell us everything you know.
So are you seeing here we go.
I'm seeing your screen, man. I'm
Oh, you
seeing
are.
I'm
Okay.
seeing your vacation
I'm,
home there on the
I'm
right.
let me try to get this up bigger here. There we
There
go.
you go. All right.
So we talked about T cells, and when I taught at the seminar, it starts here with the thymus ultimately, right? So we've got this little thymus gland, it sits right on this underneath the sternum here. And when I was in chiro school, they said, the thymus basically shrinks up, shrivels up, and dies, in our teens. So why would that be? That's cortisol inhibits secretory IgA, inhibits that thymus gland so that it doesn't function as it should. Why is that relevant in cancers and these things? Is because that thymus is what does these APC, means the antigen presenting cells. In other words, it tags toxic metals, it tags viruses, which are the two main triggers for cancers. It tags these things so the immune system says, hey, foreign invader, let's go get it, right? And so
Right.
then we get into this whole, looks a little daunting and overwhelming as we first pull up a chart like this, especially for the non-practitioner group that's listening. But recognize that this is something very easy to deal with and facilitate proper functioning of so that we can have TH17. We want the immune system functioning properly. If this TH17 goes bananas, then we end up with these autoimmune problems and inflammatory problems, allergies. You see these red arrows all leading to this cancer marker here. So here again, T is thymus. That's TH17, whether it's high or low. Either way can lead to cancers, and
Here's the
then
thing.
we
I don't
have
want to
trouble.
interrupt there, but like you said,
Mhm.
we were taught that the thymus kind of shrivels up after we're kids and goes away. And I think that has a lot to do with why immune problems become so much harder for people in as they age in older populations.
Right.
It's disrespect for it. And you and I have talked a lot about this, but I want to right away for the people listening out there know that there is a lot you can do for your thymus gland, right? We talk a lot about protomorphogens. We've talked about this before. There is a thymus gland protomorphogen. So on the third month of every cycle, I am doing some thymus PMG to reprotect and strengthen my thymus gland. Thymex, the cytosol extract, and we'll talk about other things that contain it. But also, you and I talked about L-Reuteri, right? So there's so much more that we can do for the thymus gland than we realize. And
Right.
honestly, I think a lot of the success of a lot of these people with peptides that they're getting that are injecting is because their thymus isn't strong enough to be able to create those peptides anymore. But that's a whole sidebar. But can you take us on this journey here? You got a good
Yeah.
story.
So things that inhibit the thymus is aluminum. So aluminum from
Mhm.
call it inverse order. We got chemtrails, deodorant, and then immunizations. Three top sources of aluminum, right? And so somebody's getting an immunization for the flu or for whatever they're requiring for the kid to stay in school. That then inhibits the thymus, sets up these problems. You have something you're chomping at the bit to share there.
No, I'm just going to ask you what your go-to is to help get rid of aluminum, right?
Yeah,
Obviously, you
thymus
want to,
PMG.
and thymus PMG is your number one for that. I didn't
It
know that.
is. It is my
Okay,
number one to get the
interesting.
aluminum. I upregulate the thymus gland to tag the aluminum to get it functioning again, and that helps move that aluminum out. So yeah,
Wow,
fantastic
wow.
question.
See,
And
worth
so
worth me doing this every week just to learn that one pearl. Thank
that is, I mean, and it's so prolific, so profound. And so
Wow.
we should talk. I'm a structure function kind of guy. The muscle that gets weak when the thymus is compromised is the infraspinatus. So that's this external rotation of the shoulder. That's frozen shoulder, right? We get that bound up shoulder. You texted me about one of these
Yep.
a couple
Yep.
months ago. Thymus PMG, I believe, was the solution for
It
that
was.
person.
Yep.
So that infraspinatus, key rotator cuff muscle, because when the infraspinatus is in spasm, the shoulder joint jams up and we can't get that humerus to move. And that's where we get that frozen shoulder. And that's the tension, the pain behind the shoulder. So Thymus PMG, getting the aluminum out of the diet, is going to be a very beneficial way to go there. On the screen, I have this sweet young gal. She was about 22 to 24 when she came to see me, in a wheelchair, couldn't walk, had no strength in her legs. And the reason this is relevant in this case is because her thymus had been removed. It had run amok, if you will, as a young child, and so she had the scar, and they'd removed her thymus, which made her hyper reactive to everything in on the planet, if you will. And so in her case, she went to Mayo Clinic or some other big clinic like that. Uh, in After I treated her a week or two, a couple of weeks, I believe at that point, she stayed there for a couple of weeks and came back. I'm like, all right, what did we learn? Let's get after this. First I was afraid that they were going to send her back with a suitcase full of medications and so on.
Right.
But basically they just said she had a myo-neurojunction problem, and that's the way it was. So they didn't give her any drugs or do anything about it. I'm like, great, let's learn from this. So I was able to extrapolate the acetylcholine, that helps drive the myo-neurojunction, the connection of the muscles to the nerves, or excuse me, backwards, the nerves to the muscles. And in her case, it was an autoimmune attack against that connection, and it turned out to be sesame of all things.
Wow.
So she ate sesame, and that did this molecular mimicry. So her nervous system attacked that sesame, attacked her nervous system, thinking that it was a sesame, that it was a foreign invader. So we got her off sesame, had her on the Thymus PMG, and she was walking within a week, and
Wow.
got her driver's license. She's now married with beautiful kids, and life goes on, and she's functioning, flourishing great. So that was life without a thymus gland, just to kind of give an idea of you people that are listening, typically, if the non-practitioners that are listening tend to be, have a lot of these autoimmune, these overreactive type problems that, again, we're talking about this because Keytruda, I mean, if we don't get this system regulated, then we end up with cancer. So that we have the thymus does these antigen presenting cells that then, excuse me, differentiate into what they call naive T cells, which then drives the whole immune system that we were talking about up here. So
Right.
so it starts on the left, and we, reading left to right, goes through. And if this immune system is not functioning right, then we end up with cancers and big problems, and we're ready to mortgage the house to try to survive to see the grandkids, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. You have something
No, I'm
are
just
you just
looking at the
taking
rest of
in?
this slide you got here because you have other nutrients on there because we were talking about all the nutrients required.
Right.
But if you want to just walk us through a little bit more on what you're
So
doing there.
nutrients we had, where did I get to? We had glutathione here. So
Okay.
here's some of the herbs that help balance, if you will. Amphoterically is the big term, since some of the doctors are listening, that balance the immune system. Astragalus, I like to use that as I am currently in an overtrained state to keep the immune system balanced. When I look at training as trying to train as hard as I possibly can without falling off the cliff. There's overtraining, getting sick, because then I'm backwards on my training. So
Right.
astragalus helps me stay right at the edge of that uh, threshold of overtraining. Boswellia, fantastic anti-inflammatory herb. That's where aspirin was originally extracted from, was from the Boswellia, right? And it also helps the kidney. So people with spinal pain, had a kid that I couldn't even do activator type adjusting on because and she was also in a wheelchair, couldn't touch her spine because it was so inflamed. We put her on a bunch of Boswellia, and I was able to go back and do manual adjusting and get her back on track and get her back to soccer and everything, mostly by Boswellia. Turmeric's got all kinds of anti-cancerous benefits, right? As well as all its inflammatory and so on. So some great benefits there. Hawthorn also is notorious for cardiovascular support. Also has some nitric oxide balancing, which is going to also, again, help regulate the immune system. And then Rehmannia is kind of the gold shining star for autoimmune conditions,
Let's
that's why it's named Rehmannia. Carry
let's go
on.
back to Hawthorn a little bit. That's interesting that you put in the top five herbs for this Hawthorn, because I
Mhm.
think of Hawthorn for, of course, the heart, very much so.
Right.
And Joseph Antel would call the thymus the mother of the heart, right? There's a really powerful connection between the
Mm.
heart and the thymus gland. But Hawthorn is also in a product called Chelaco, which is for chelating
Oh,
heavy metals, right? So are you aware of it helping to chelate out this aluminum that you're saying is one of the biggest drivers of this potentially? Because there's garlic and hawthorn and milk thistle in chelaco. So hawthorn, I know, does have some heavy metal chelation properties to it.
Well, I got something else to be testing people on now. Thank you.
Yeah. All
That's
right.
why we do these, right? We're all
Right.
learning. Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. And again, it goes back to we're talking about Keytruda. These are triggers for cancer, right? So the
Mhm.
first two things I'm looking for any cancer consideration, well, we have methylation and P450, two key pathways in the liver. They both have different kind of cancer constellations, if you will, or outcomes. But the typical triggers for those are either going to be toxic metals or a virus, right? And so again, we have hawthorn. We have like a product like Chelico with the hawthorn in there, that's going to help bind up those toxic metals and de-stress the liver so that those cells aren't mutating anymore. Or we've got, viruses, cold flu viruses, mono, things like that upregulate this first phase of detoxification, which then when it runs amok causes cells all over the body to mutate. That's more of our malignant type of cancers. Again, Keytruda, because it's affecting the thymus, that's way upstream on the immune system. That's why it's potentially beneficial for 18 different cancers,
Right.
because
Right.
it's affecting all these different pathways potentially. Great
Right.
business concept, by the way.
Well, sure. Well, because it's much more complicated to do it with nutrition and herbs, right? There's so many things that you have to find. What is the missing piece? Is it vitamin D? Is it, is it zinc? There's so much more to do that. Whereas they found a way to do it, well, impact it with the medication
Hmm.
in a way that is being approved for 18 different ones. But I think, like you said, it's so helpful for us to kind of look at that and go, okay, what can we do? What can we learn from this to help support our immune system so that we can stay as far away from that as possible? Because of course there are negative side effects, right, to these drugs always.
Always. That's the unfortunate part. And so, I mean, just to kind of breach that subject in the front of this series now, what can we learn? How that's why we like to study the mechanism of action of these things, right? So, what is if they have benefit from this medication? First off, what can we learn from that? How do we need to facilitate their immune system in this case, or their detoxification and so on? But then if it's a product that they quote need to be on for whatever reason, we've talked about the pill, the birth control pill a couple of times or things like that theoretically, somebody might have the emotional need, quote need for, then we need to look at what the side effects of taking it are. The side effects are almost always because of the nutritional compromises that it creates, right? It creates vitamin deficiencies in compromising metabolism. So then we look at antidotes, if you will, speaking to the doctor population now,
Right.
that, if you're a muscle tester, I would put the medication in the left hand. That's a way of saying, okay, what is the perceived benefit or the physiologic benefit to this product? We put it in the left hand and then look to see what nutrient will compensate for the compromise that product is or that medication
Mhm.
creates so that we
Okay.
can do some justice, be on the team for the person suffering with this stuff.
So, uh, aluminum, I keep going back to aluminum because I want to
Hmm.
make sure that we're reminded. You said that there's three ways that people are getting exposed to it. You said air pollution is one of them, right?
Yes,
So that one's kind of hard for anybody
right.
to completely avoid. You said, what were the other two that you said
Uh,
were
uh,
common?
Antiperspirant is,
First, right? Yep.
aluminum blocks perspiration. So that's going to block that perspiration back into the lymph nodes around the breast tissue. So very common potential trigger for breast cancer, unfortunately,
Right.
as is this whole nother subject, but thyroid medications,
Mm,
especially, the two primary thyroid medications tend to cause hypomethylation. Now, there's underfunctioning methylation, which opens the door for cancer. So there's another potential trigger. Sidebar there, sorry,
no,
but
no,
a,
not at
a
all.
pearl that could hopefully help save somebody's life.
Sure.
So if it's aluminum, stop using antiperspirant. You're going to sweat and you're going to stink for a couple of weeks while you kind of detox on it.
Hmm.
Um, Experiment with some that are not antiperspirants because it's the antiperspirant aspect that has the aluminum typically.
Yep.
So shift away from that. And then
I
we
always
talk.
tell people to walk around with those wet wipes and just wipe your pits, throughout the day. I mean, if you're
Okay.
really worried about how you smell, you're going, it's like you said, you're going to detox it. So that it doesn't affect your social life so much. Just carry some of those little, clean little wet wipes and just clean yourself regularly.
Right.
It'll go
As
away. But like you're saying, it will. At some point you won't need it. And there are a lot of
right,
clean deodorants out there, right, that don't have
right.
aluminum in them for sure.
Get yourself detoxed. I mean, the worst of this was John, that's this patient that had hyperhidrosis, sweating through a couple t-shirts a day. He basically sprayed his entire body with antiperspirant.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
we had a lot of detoxification to do for him. I mean, we got his adrenals fixed, got him detoxed eventually, but it took some work and some patience on his part. He was not a patient guy. He was a go-getter,
Hmm.
and frustrated about having to carry extra shirts with him all, every day.
Yeah.
But we did get him there. So, and then the other one was immunizations. Unfortunately, in
Mm.
the early days, immunizations were loaded with mercury as the adjuvant to protect and, trigger the immune system. Then our peers, the alternative health arena, got all up in arms saying that the mercury was the bigger trigger problem with immunizations. So they instead of getting rid of the mercury, they reduced the mercury and then they added aluminum. So now there's two metals, toxic metals in those as adjuvants in those immunizations, which trips up the immune system even further, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So with a lot of that being aluminum, the main thing I'm using for kids that are needing to get their shots to get into junior high or to be in school or, to go in the military or whatever the requirement, so-called requirement is, hopefully until we can get some of this reduced. The main thing I'm using is Thymus PMG in those
Wow.
cases.
I would think, and this is where super EFF for those of you who are standard process practitioners might be helpful as well, because the aluminum does cause demyelination, right? So it does destroy that myelin sheath. And so sometimes
So
you
the condition there would be MS.
Mhm.
Just for those carry
Yeah,
on.
and the super EFF was intended to go along with protomorphogens. So this might be a case specifically, but I'm thinking of an aluminum detoxification protocol. And what I'm
Hmm.
trying to figure out is I know that there are specific heavy metals that are competitive specifically with minerals, essential minerals. For example,
Hmm.
lead versus calcium. Is there a mineral that aluminum is specifically competitive with that we would need to bring in to help replace and displace the aluminum that you?
Typically, I'm looking at double positive charge things, like magnesium.
Okay.
Ultimately,
Okay.
calcium magnesium is often what I'm considering in those cases. And it was music to my ears to hear you talking that way because that's what I'm preaching often. I'm
Yeah.
honored. Thank you. But I
Definitely.
have to say, in this case, thymus is really the main thing that I find to
Mm.
be beneficial. I'm always testing for call it a mineral antidote, if you will.
Yeah.
So, what you're referring to for the rest of the listening public is typically toxic metals displace minerals that we need and that's where a lot of the physiologic compromise comes from. So the double protocol is, do we need to bind up that metal or do we need to saturate with the healthy mineral to push it out? So, what you're referring to is, super saturating with the healthy mineral, in this case, potentially calcium or magnesium, because those are the divalent, the double positive charge minerals that will compete, if you will, for aluminum binding. So I would definitely consider those. Certainly we've got muscle cramps that would go along with calcium deficiency and,
Right.
magnesium imbalance, sleep disruptions, bone count compromise. Go on.
Well, and if you're looking to fully strengthen the thymus, if you're following Joseph Antel's teachings on the thymus, he always says, the protomorphogen is the protein, but the mineral for the thymus is calcium, or one of the minerals, the main minerals. So to help nourish the thymus back to 100%, you need calcium. You need vitamin C, a good whole food vitamin C as well.
Hmm.
I don't remember which herb he said would be specific to the thymus, but it might be one of the five that you're showing here.
I would
Might be
assume
echinacea.
astragalus. Oh, you
Actually,
think
it's
echinacea?
echinacea. Astragalus
Okay.
or astragalus complex does have echinacea in it as well. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
so I do think it is echinacea. I could be wrong, but if somebody knows differently, please leave it in the comments and
So
correct.
let's do a quick divergent on the calcium aspect.
Sure.
Calcium running the immune system. So the first thing I'm recommending if somebody has a fever is calcium lactate, right?
Yes.
We want to supersaturate the body with the calcium that is being burned up in that fever. The shiver, the shakes, all that, right? The typically the prolonged fevers is because the body uses up that calcium, and then the immune system doesn't have the needed nutrients to fight that fever. So rather than, reach for, an NSAID, aspirin, Advil, Tylenol kind of thing to break a fever, calcium lactate hourly, fairly high dose, even hourly, even for infants, young children, we have powdered forms of it or crush up the tablets to give to these children hourly. If you're nursing, take it as the mom, or put it on the nipple and, have the kid get it that way or in the
Right.
bottle.
Yeah.
Even teething, these areas, these aspects. But again, calcium just has a great point of how calcium does upregulate and facilitate immune function in a really beautiful way.
Well, I would never miss an opportunity to tell somebody that they need more calcium, right?
Right.
From that heavy metal standpoint, I think of all the lead toxicity. If you were saturated with calcium, it'd be so much harder for your body to have any problem with lead. And so I think that we could all take more time to put more attention back on getting a good, and not calcium carbonate, not the garbage calcium that's in over the counter.
You don't want to eat clamshells, huh?
Right. Yeah, coral calcium. Oh man. But I do want to remind everybody and who's listening that calcium lactate has shown to be 1,000 times more bioavailable than calcium carbonate. So that alone,
Mhm.
right, is worth,
Great pearl.
yeah,
Mhm.
thinking about that. And 100 times
Mhm.
more bioavailable than calcium citrate. So the lactate, they created that because it was mimicking breast milk, right? In the way that a baby would be getting that. So that's why they used lactate, which is a really, really smart way of getting it. And again, I've talked about Joseph Antel. We've talked about him a lot. But when I went through his protocol book, I think it was over 40% of all of his protocols in order of importance started with calcium lactate.
Right.
So,
Wally Schmidt, the late great Dr. Wally Schmidt does the same thing. He
mm,
did a seminar on, keep these in your medicine cabinet.
yeah,
And, half the protocols, started with calcium lactate as well.
yeah, that's right. I travel with those immune packs that have it in there, and yeah, it's a very important one. Sweet. Well, we're running a little low on time. What last thoughts do you have on this, Dr. V, to share with everybody? I think we've hit some interesting points.
Yeah, the one subject, if it's an inhaled toxin, again from
Mhm.
chemtrails or poison, then we want to strengthen the lungs. I think of products like Resco or things to help facilitate optimum lung function, so that the lung can detoxify those toxins when we're exposed to them. I mean, I ride my bike, around tailpipes
Yeah,
often, so I'm getting a
yeah,
lot of that. I try to avoid them as best as I can, but the reality is I'm taking a lung support, typically Resco. I originally figured this out when I'd go on my bike rides where I'd be around cars a fair bit, and I'd have a cough at the end in the afternoon, and finally recognized that was
mhm,
my lungs, my body telling me that I was, breathing these things that weren't metabolizing well. So I'm strengthening the lungs in that case. So just another pearl.
yeah.
Again, just final thoughts. I mean, if you're, I mean, for the people that are listening to this, they're probably would have to be pretty desperate to turn to big pharma, to turn to these solutions. So let's learn from what the body's giving. And again, we got white clouds in the fingernails, easy early solution symptom that the zinc levels are low. Or if your shoulder, frozen shoulder problems, that's a sign your immune system's not functioning right. Tension in that left upper trap, that's going to be because the left lat, which is associated with the immune system. These are all early warning signs that the immune system's not functioning. Low energy in the morning, not recovering after exercise. All these things are early warning signs that if we just listen to what the body's saying, then we can avoid all this chaos and supporting these poisonous solutions, so-called
Right, right,
solutions.
right,
So
right, right.
learn from what your body's trying to tell you. I mean, this is the theme of our podcast, but let's get the understanding of what the early warning signs are so that we don't have to end up in these desperate states.
Hmm. And I have to add at the end of all of that to when I did this presentation, I pointed out, yes, it was $8 billion in the second quarter that have gone to this one drug, right, for 18 different cancers. But I looked up the amount of profit that Coca-Cola alone did in
Mhm.
the second quarter, and their gross profits were 12.5 billion. So that may be something to look at as far as your exposure to sugar, which is also going to wipe out your immune system.
Right.
It's going to make your vitamin C less useful. There's so much. So keep that in mind. Another reason why every November I encourage and invite everyone to join me in going sugar free for the 21 days between Halloween and Thanksgiving, at least, right? Just to encourage you to give your body a break from that. Not that you,
Only 21 days?
well, I'm just saying, for the general population out there, Dr. V. You got to give people permission. You have to give them a really important
A reason.
time,
Yeah.
yeah, to really dedicate to that because it's too easy. So many people express love with sugar, right? So we just have to stop that for 21 days at least, and I'm going to do it again in January. But yeah, the sugar thing is a big piece too. If you guys found this interesting, we're going to look at some of these other drugs on there and talk about some of the things that you could be doing now to keep you from having to run into those as well in the future, hopefully, or at least what can we learn from that? What are some of the things that it's intended to do, and how can we do our best to achieve that with natural chemistry? And we got a lot of things lined up. So we're not running out of material, but we appreciate you listening. We appreciate your comments very much so and your questions. And we're going to do our best to keep bringing the best content we can to you guys on a regular basis. But Dr. V has
Post,
a coach he's got to get to now. Go.
I was just say, post any meds or any other pharmaceuticals or things that, similar subjects that you'd like us to cover. This is fun. Let's keep inspiring.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one.